One of the things that can completely change how your oil paint behaves, how it flows, how transparent it is, how it feels underneath the brush, is the medium that you mix into it. Today I want to share 4 of the paint mediums that I use regularly in the studio and talk about how each one helps me to control the consistency of the oil paint straight out of the tube. Understanding what these mediums do can really open up new options in your painting. So let's get right to the lesson. So on here I have laid out the 4 main painting mediums that I use, along with some burnt umber to kind of show you guys the properties of these 4 different mediums and how I use them and why I like them. Paint mediums really affect the quality of the paint. It can either make it flowier, more transparent, or thicker. And I think of this in terms of how, let's say we have a baseline of our paint, right, out of the tube, straight up out of the tube paint, just like we have here, that consistency. And different paints have somewhat different consistencies. Some are a little bit looser, some are a little tighter and a little bit more opaque and condensed. But for the most part, paint is our kind of median point here. So that's our paint. And so when I think about my mediums, I'm like, what mediums do I want to make the paint a little thinner? And what mediums do I want to use to make the paint a little bit thicker? Or a little bit more transparent? Or just a little bit more bulky in body, right? So I tend to think about things as being out of the tube, straight up, and then I kind of think of this graph here where I have thicker and then I have flowy. Now, these mediums all fall on different points in this spectrum here, and I just kind of want to show you how they fall and why I use them and the mediums that I choose and how they affect drying time as well. I decided to use a white panel here today to do this mix so you can also see the transparency. First medium I want to go over is my Walnut Alkid medium, not to be confused with Walnut medium. And this is my very, very flowy medium, right? So it's got, when I add the paint to it, see how it really transparentizes the paint. What this is good for is that we get a long, transparent stroke, which is good to have. Now, what this also does is it kind of, again, transparentizes our paint mixture. And so if we were to take what the paint is straight out of the tube, our mass tone, like we were talking about, I'm going to do a mass tone just right here of our burnt umber. And so we can see how this is straight out of the tube and how the mediums affect it. So here we go, straight out of the tube, slight bit of transparency on white, which is really nice. Now we see that adding this paint medium really, again, transparentizes. So I'll use this to kind of block things in really quickly, to kind of move into my shadows. I want my shadows to have a transparency to them. And so I'll use this Walnut Alkid medium to get a flowier paint stroke with a smaller round brush to do hair and to kind of keep a very delicate stroke. And I love using the Walnut Alkid because it's got an Alkid in it, which is a dryer. So it helps to dry the paint overnight. And for me, I like to layer paint on top of dry layers as I work. I like to have the wet and wet layer in the very beginning when I'm working on the painting. But the next day, I like that I've kind of sealed in a layer of paint that's dry so that I can build more opacity and fresher chroma and color on top of that first dried layer. And so like I'm always trying to build towards more chroma and texture within my paintings, and then having that paint layer dry by using Alkids, it is really, really helpful. And so that's really what I love about this transparent medium right here. And if I'm painting hair and I want the brush just to have a nice flow to it, I'll use the Walnut Alkid. It's really beautiful. Similarly, but slightly different texture is my Galkid Gel, which is right here. You can see that this is a little bit, it's a gel versus a liquid. And so this also gets me a little bit more transparent. And it also helps the paint dry a little faster. This just has a little bit more body to it. Honestly, you could get away with either of these two. They kind of work the same in some respects, but the Galkid Gel kind of holds the stroke a little bit more than the transparent Walnut Alkid. So it's Galkid Gel. So Galkid, clever. It's Gamblin and Alkid to make Galkid. And it's a gel, so it has a little bit more, has a little bit of flow to it as well. Not quite as long of strokes, but it's also, it works pretty nice. And that's the Galkid Gel. Now, as we start to kind of move into paint to getting a little bit thicker with the paint, I move, also the Galkid Gel kind of falls on the flowy side of our paint. If I want to get a little bit thicker to the paint, but also keep it transparent, I move more towards stand oil. Now, stand oil is like almost a honey consistency, right? So you can see my brush kind of lifting some of that up. Do you see that? And it kind of, I'll let some drip down. Hopefully you guys can see that. So this flowy, thicker honey, think of that. So we put down some of that medium, and it also transparentizes a little bit more so. Well, it also transparentizes, but you can see that we get a shorter, a little bit more glazy of a stroke. Kind of like pulls out of the brush really beautifully. And that's the stand oil. I get a lot of questions sometimes, people asking why I don't use linseed oil for my flowy medium. And I think of linseed oil as what the binder is, the binding oil that we use in our paints. And so I don't love the idea of adding a lot more oil to basically dilute the paint pigments in the paint by using linseed oil. Now I will use linseed oil that's thickened, right? So what stand oil is, because it gives the paint a whole new property. And I love, if I've been painting on a face and I just want to glaze in some beautiful reds into the cheeks, I move for the stand oil, because it also leavens the stroke, which means overnight, as it dries, it flattens out, and so you lose any of this texture that you have here. This guy, the gel, will hold on to the texture slightly, and the Walnut Alkid will probably also lose the texture. But the stand oil leavens that stroke, and so it's really beautiful for a softening an edge or pulling warms in and out of flesh tones that you've already had dry. And so I love how this reacts. I also love how having it on the palette and you have a brush, if I have a round brush, you can sharpen your brush with a little bit of stand oil. So if I have a round brush that I'm using, like this Treacle Protege, and I use a little bit of the stand oil, whereas I can just kind of, if you look at my palette when I paint, I have a lot of little strings that kind of go like that. That's me sharpening my paintbrush to a point to get a nice point that I can use to do quote unquote fine detail or edges, and just love the stand oil for that. So I'll mix it in, and I never use too much of any of these mediums. My wife and I collect soda caps. It's funny, we don't drink a lot of soda, and so every time we're out, usually it's funny when we go to Las Vegas and we buy Fiji water, or we get Fiji water at the casinos, they have these little blue caps, and we save all the blue caps because the blue caps is pretty much what we use to put paint medium in on our palettes. And so you'll see that we have a lot of, which is small, so I don't use a lot of stand oil or Walnut Alkid. But you see how it just great, how it just sharpens those brushes. And so, yeah, we only use about a little capful, maybe every, I usually like clean them out once a week or throw them out once a week. And so we don't use a ton of medium. Now, the medium that I use, probably the most for thickening paint, the most thick medium that I use is, I'm going to use a palette knife for this, is this medium right here, which is Liquid Oleopasto. You can see how we can kind of almost shape it and sculpt it on the palette, and it pretty much dries exactly how it is, which is something that I love, because this is how I create a lot of the texture in my backgrounds. Or I'll use this in the face to kind of build up texture. I'll use a bristle brush within the lights and a little bit of this medium to kind of shape form with texture within the face. And this is one of my favorite mediums to do that. And I'll show you guys how it's just got a beautiful drag to it, right? It slightly transparentizes. Everything's gonna, if you're adding a medium that's anything, it's gonna slightly transparentize. But look at how we can drag that. I mean, that's not the prettiest color, but we can see how, and I can scoop it up, shape it, and layer. And if you've seen me do some of the broken color demos, I'm using a lot of the Oleopasto because it's slightly transparent, kind of almost glazy, but then also the texture that you put in here will stay that way. So almost like, I know artists that use asphaltum and some kind of non-archival things that they add to their paint to get kind of this texture. This works really well, and it's pretty archival. Now, a lot of these mediums don't have solvents in them. There might be a little bit of solvent in the Oleopasto and a little bit in the Galkid Gel. And so this is a way, I don't use mineral spirits or odorless mineral spirits, OMS products, because they give off a methane gas that's heavier than air. And I don't want to be breathing that. And I basically went almost completely non-toxic. Again, except for there's a slight bit of solvent in these mediums, in the Galkid and the Oleopasto, but I think it's very minimum, and I don't use that much. This is probably more than paint than I have. This is more medium than I've had out in a long time. Like I said, I only use about maybe not even like a teaspoon's worth of medium, just enough to get enough on the brush just to be able to control different circumstances that I'm in. If I want it to, again, to be glazy, textured, and flowy. Thanks guys for watching. If you found this helpful, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for more videos just like this. And if you want to go deeper into these kinds of lessons, join me over on Patreon. For just $5 a month, you get full access to all my demos, behind the scenes content, and long form lessons that I don't post anywhere else. Your support there really helps me to keep this content going, and I'd love to have you guys as part of the community. There's a link in the description below. Until next time, paint well.